Hello, good evening, everyone. We'll let everyone in. Everybody has 1 second. Okay. Good evening, all. My name is Andrea Carol McNeil. I am a grants manager with Humanities DC. I am she, her, hers. I'm an African-American female, brown complexion, and I have a twist out afro for today. Welcome to the Self-Determined Podcast, a live taping with Professor D. Boose. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with Humanities DC, our formal name is Humanities Council of Washington, DC. We aim to enrich the quality of life, foster intellectual stimulation, and promote cross-cultural understanding and appreciation of local history in all neighborhoods of the district through humanities programs and grants, as we are here today. Thank you for joining us for today's program, and thank you to Anna Kaplan, to Professor Boose, and Sister Koko for making tonight's program possible. So I will begin our introduction of guests, and joining us this evening, as I mentioned, are Professor D. Boose, as well as Sister Koko. So Professor D. Boose, goes by she, her, is a freelance historian and adjunct faculty member at American University's Department of Critical Race, Gender, and Culture Studies, and a PhD candidate in the field of US history at American University. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in African American Studies, and a master's degree from Cornell University in Africana Studies. In the past 10 years, she has worked in academia at Cornell University, American University, and Montgomery College. She has also worked extensively in the field of nonprofit youth development in DC metro area. She has been a scholarship recipient, she has been a scholarship recipient, scout, academic tutor, group facilitator, curricula designer, workshop leader, and independent researcher. Her passion is research, writing, and facilitating conversations in and among communities about the past so that we might all better understand our common humanity. Her research and writing was recently featured in the National Museum of African American History and Culture's online web resource titled Talking About Race. Boone's current research centers on the social justice and political movement of Black power, particularly its contours, effects, and legacies in the Washington, D.C. area and beyond. She is the creator and executive producer of the new podcast, The Self-Determined. Donelle is also a recipient of the 2020 2021 American Association of University Women American Fellowship. So we'll give a virtual applause to Professor Boose. And also joining us, and we will provide her formal name just for grace and courtesy, Mrs. Jean Coco Ladson. She goes by she, her, and of course, better known in the community as Sister Koko. She has been a leader in the civil rights, Black power, and Pan-Africanist freedom struggles for nearly 6 decades. She is a native of Newport News, Virginia, but she has called Washington, D.C. metro area home for the better part of 58 years. Her arrival at Howard University in the fall of 1963 coincided with a momentous time in American history. As an undergraduate, she was quickly attracted to student activism for civil rights and Black freedom. She started supporting campus fundraisers for the now historic 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Congress on Racial Equity, and Council of Federated Organizations. From there, Sister Koko's own activism blossomed. When Washington's federal anti-poverty agency, the UPO, began hiring local SNCC activists, she was among the first hired. The work put her in close working relationship with well-known anti-racist community organizers like Charles Jones and Al McSorley. In short order, she became a highly skilled community activist. Peers recognized her great talent, and she was hired to become a full-time staff worker at the Washington, D.C. SNCC office. There, she became a core organizer and eventually executive assistant and friend to Stokely Carmichael at the height of his political prominence. Characterized by friends as the force behind the force in this role, Sister Koko was out on the streets protecting and organizing even when it was dangerous, like the night of King's assassination on April 4th, 1968. Indeed, Sister Koko's organizing efforts were behind some of the most iconic Black Power events, like the Hero's Welcome received by John Carlos in Washington after his world-famous Black Power fist protest in the 1968 Olympics. For a time, Sister Koko even organized alongside Black Panther Party national leadership. In the 1970s into the 1980s, she became deeply engaged in organizing campaigns supporting decolonization in Africa and the Caribbean, mentoring such lights as the late anti-apartheid activist Damu Smith, and participating in the United Nations General Assembly. In this work, Sister Koko traveled extensively and knew personally African anti-colonial activists and national leaders. In more recent years, Sister Koko returned to her local roots in community organizing, working on economic development projects in Sea Pleasant, Maryland. At present, she is mostly retired, but offers her energy to her memoir projects and important groups like SNCC Legacy Project. Sister Koko is a dearly loved mother, grandmother, wife, and sister to her family, and a respected comrade of all who worked alongside her. The Self-Determined Podcast is a documentary podcast that chronicles Black American history through the experiences of Black people who have lived in Washington, D.C. So before we get started, we'll do a few housekeeping notes and announcements. So before we begin the program, so for today's Zoom meeting, we will be recording the meeting and it will be made available on Humanities DC's YouTube channel. Since this is a live podcast taping, the recording may also be published as an episode of the Self-Determined Podcast. So please turn on your video if you feel comfortable in doing so, and also hold your questions until the end. We will move into the Q&A portion. You can use the raise hand feature by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen so that we can call on you at that time. So I will now turn the program over to Professor D. Boose.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that gracious introduction. I just want to do a quick check here because I know we were having a little bit of a tech issue. Ms. Coco, are you able to hear me? Okay, I'm going to give the introduction and we'll keep working with Ms. Coco to see if we can make sure she is able to call in live. So I have just muted myself. First things first, I would like to say hello, and I'd like to thank Humanities DC for inviting me to do this live podcasting experience today. I'm really excited to be here. And of course, I want to thank Sister Koko for being so gracious to accept and share about her incredible life. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with her and to share with you all today. And as you've heard in the introduction, we're in the presence of a real champion of the Black freedom struggle in America. So today's format will be a series of short conversations with myself and Sister Koko as we showcase some of the highlights from an upcoming episode of the Self-Determined podcast. And because we have such great content in store, I won't waste too much time with this introductory material, but I do want to give a sense of how the Self-Determined podcast came about. So let me pull up my screen here. So let's see. I'm just going to share with you. If I can get it here. Okay. So hopefully you all can see this. And let's minimize this here. Fabulous. Okay. So, I can minimize my notes as well. Give me one moment here, folks. Okay, well, I guess it's not going to work. All right. So 5 years ago, I was in the early stages of my research on the Black Power movement in Washington, D.C. And I was specifically interested in the movement through the lens of Black women's activism. But I knew that in order to really understand it, I would need to listen to and even create more oral history interviews to supplement the lack of data that was in the traditional archives. So I looked for opportunities to meet activists. I got my first big break in that effort when I met Mrs. Karen Spellman of the SNCC Legacy Project and of the Black Power Chronicles, which, by the way, if you have not visited their websites, you are missing out on a trove of really important Black history. So do go and check those out and then share widely. But I'm digressing. So Mrs. Spellman connected me with Sister Koko, as well as Miss Niani Kilkenny and Professor Kihimbe Eichelberger. And I ultimately held a panel discussion with the three women about the night of April 4th, 1968 in Washington, D.C., which of course is the night that Dr. King was assassinated and the city of Washington went into flames. This conversation was held before a live audience at the DC Historical Society's annual conference, and it was very successful. After that meeting, I reached out to Sister Koko and I asked if I could conduct an oral history with her. She agreed, and in 2018, we had our first conversation. Now, since that time, we've had many conversations, and I've grown to more fully understand the historical weight and consequence of Sister Koko. And in my estimation, it's really important that her story and others like it are available to the general public in a format with easier access than that of scholarly books. So I conceived of the Self-Determined podcast. And as producer of the show, I aim to tell true stories of history that inspire everyday people in the community, especially those that are marginalized, and especially those who are Black. So this show is an effort, that effort materialized. And so today I'm going to give you a sneak peek, and I hope that you will be inspired to tune into more episodes of the podcast. So enough about the show, broadly speaking. What I want to do now is talk about the amazing woman that is Sister Koko. And so to open it up, I will play the first clip from the show, and I will reintroduce you to the one and only Sister Koko. So I will now pull up my first clip. So if you're in the audience and you can hear this, let me know by giving me a thumbs up.
This is what I want to tell you, though. You know, I have watched Coco from 1967 until this day. It's nobody, and I know a lot of people. I met a lot of women over the years. but Coco's in a she's in a category all by herself. All by herself. She truly is. And folk who meet her have no idea of how consequential she is. And there's something about me that makes me angry. It's like, how do you get to talk to her? You don't even know who this is. Go sit down in the corner somewhere. How do you have entree to her? You're silly. You asking silly questions. You don't know who this is. She's in the vanguard of the revolution. Y'all don't even know what that means.
Welcome back to The Self-Determined, and this is a very special episode because today we are presenting you with a sneak peek of a multi-part series on the show about a very special Black Power activist who you are likely unfamiliar with. Her name is Sister Koko, and she has been a Black freedom fighter in the U.S. and abroad for 58 years. She is known in the community for her past work for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, aka SNCC, the Black United Front, the Black Panther Party, and for her long-standing Pan-Africanist and decolonial activism, just to hit the highlights. So kick back and listen, and we'll get into it.
She is what I call unsung, and we talk about that all the time. That they get as many licks as everybody else. They suffer the same kinds of, they have to make the same kind of sacrifices, suffering, the indignities and all that kind of stuff.
Like, I've read documents recently that the FBI had on her. And I'm like, dang, so that's why I didn't get the job. Okay, it makes perfect sense now. Oh, you were a badass, Sister Koko.
Welcome to The Self-Determined, a brand new documentary podcast for your listening enjoyment and Black education. Each episode, I'm chronicling extraordinary Black life stories from the civil rights and Black power movements all the way to Black Lives Matter. You will hear firsthand Black history from the trailblazers themselves. I'm talking firsthand accounts of the March on Washington, untold stories about the Black Panther Party, and personal accounts of FBI actions against Black activists, and much, much more. Tune in for the Black history you haven't heard. I'm your host, Professor D. Boose, and this is The Self-Determined. Okay, so we're back. Miss Coco, are you able to speak with us now? If you are, just tap your phone and the mute button should come off. Okay, I think she's still having a couple of technical difficulties. So while she's doing that, what I'm going to do is just explain to you a little bit about the clip that you just heard. And so I hope that just in hearing those clips, you started to get a sense of the gravity and the importance of Sister Koko. So the voices you heard there are important because the first there was the voice of Miss Vera Hope Walston, a Black Power and Pan-Africanist activist in her own right, and a longtime friend of Sister Koko. You'll hear a little bit more of her later in the program. In her story and in its own right is so impactful that our first episode on the entire podcast is actually about her life. So definitely be sure to go and check that out. The second voice was that of Dr. Cleveland Sellers, and he is one of the leaders and legends of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a close confidant of Stokely Carmichael, and a good friend of Miss Coco as well. And the last voice you heard there was Sister Coco's own daughter, that of Tandiwe Farrow, and she's speaking from her own life experience of having a mother who was very active in the movement. So these are folks who were very, very aware of her life's work in a very intimate way and very clear about the importance of the work she was engaged in. Now, in my personal view, Sister Koko can be very, very modest, I would say sometimes to a fault. But today I'm putting her on the spotlight. And if we can get the technology to cooperate with us, I hope that you'll be able to hear from her in her own words. But what I want to do is just talk for a second about what they're saying, because one of the very first quotes in that clip was that she was being described as being in the vanguard of the revolution. And it's a very comical clip because, Miss Vera Hope is saying that most people don't even know what that means. But what it means is that she was among the handful of people who were in the leadership of Black radical politics in the United States. So she's working with people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She's working with people with the Black Panther Party, but she's not just working just with rank and file, because she does that because she's a community organizer, but she's also working with the leadership in the rooms and helping to organize the thinking around these things. And so this is why she carries such weight and importance in the movement. Dr. Cleveland Sellers, is here, calling her an unsung hero, and unsung because she's a person who's instrumental in making so much of the movement happen, but she's not a name that most people know. And I think that it's important that we correct that and make sure that we all understand that we have very important leaders who should definitely get their shine. But I also want us to be thinking about who are the players that are making the gears work, making the programs happening, helping the ideas get disseminated to the masses and getting the community in motion. And she's certainly one of those people. And the last comment you heard was from her daughter, who called her a, quote, badass. And if you met Miss Koko on the street, you would not get this, but because she's such a soft-spoken and calm woman, but badass indeed. And I think that as you listen to more of these clips, you will get a real sense about why that is, and why, it's a real thing for her daughter to say, oh, yeah, the FBI was knocking around our door and here's why, right? So I don't think she's back in the room yet. Let me just look and see if she is. If she is, I'll ask her the question. No, she's still having trouble. But so I'm going to move on to the next clip, and hopefully we can get her in by the end so that you all will be able to ask questions of her. So let's see. So this next clip, in the audio, you will hear a portion of an interview between Sister Koko and myself. And in it, she's describing a bit of what her childhood was like. And I found the clip to be a great example of the leadership qualities that she possessed at even a young age. So what we'll do now is just go ahead and take a listen to that.
Let's go back to before, maybe the year or two before I came to Howard.
Okay, go for it.
Who I was and what I did. Because I grew up in a segregated community in southeastern Virginia called Newport News. At that time, it was called Warwick, a municipality that had a lot of Black people in it. I was in a segregated school system, but we were in one of the better schools. It was a first-class, beautiful school. I arrived there in 56. And beautiful, big school, big hallways, just had your eyes stretched out open. Our family was a family of achievers. I was the third of three. My brother was an achiever, honor roll student. And my sister herself was honor roll student. And so that by the time I got there, I was riding reps, so to speak. But being the third of three children, by the time I got to school, I not only heard the 1, 2, 3s and ABCs, but I was adding and subtracting and learning sentence structure. When I got to first grade, they didn't even let me stay in the classroom. They paraded me around to all the other classes. But school for me, I never saw it as a learning process because I was learning at home with my siblings. I remember they used to spank the students, and there was a teacher there, a male teacher, but he would allow us to take licks for the students who were bad. They were going to get spanked. And I remember that before he allowed it, the student got all them licks. So I suggested that, well, why can't we help him out? Well, why can't we help him out? Well, why can't we help him out? Let's go back. Let's go back to
Okay. Miss Coco, you there yet? I saw you pop in, maybe? Not yet. Okay, we're getting closer. So in this clip, I thought that it was a really great example of showing how two things. One, Sister Koko had within herself already a person. Oh, Miss Coco, are you there?
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
We're so excited
Oh,
to have you. So look, so did you hear that last clip?
No.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to explain to you what the clip was, and then I'm going to ask your reaction to it. Because I'm really excited right now. I wasn't sure if the technology was going to work, but now we're here. So, and we can hear you, and this is good enough. So we're just going to go with it. So, the clip was you talking about what it was like growing up in Newport News, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And I shared the story of you volunteering to take licks for your classmates. So, my question here is, what was it about you that even at that young age made you decide, let's help this student out so far to take like a physical punishment for another student? What was it about you? What do you think?
I'm not sure. I have to admit, though I grew up in a segregated community, long ago and all of that, I had a pretty good life myself. I was among the privileged in my community. My dad was a shopkeeper. We had businesses, stores, and you just felt sorry for people who couldn't have or didn't have what you had. So besides the fact that nobody was going to put their hands on Joe McQueen's children, that's my dad, I felt sorry for children who had to endure it. So I suggested it and he accepted it. And we did. Several of us agreed to take the licks.
I think it's such an incredible story because I think it's just not one, I don't even know if I would have been for my brother or sister. So I'm like, oh, this is impressive to me. But I think it also really gets to this, it illustrates the ways in which you're organizing in your community, even as a small, a young person. And I just thought that it was, a keen insight into things that would blossom more in later points in your life. So just hang on there. I'm gonna play this next clip, and then we're going to talk a little bit more. So
okay,
don't go anywhere.
Okay.
And what was it like growing up in Newport News, Virginia?
It was great because that's all I knew. Unlike deeper in the South, where I grew up, we didn't have the constant threat of having to say the right things and do the right things and be in the right places or be subjected to nasty racism of children as well as adults, like the horrible Emmett Till situation where he had to go into a white grocery store, and of course being accosted as he was. But our stores were black, our neighborhoods were black, our schools were black, my playmates were black, the police assigned to our neighborhood was black. So it was nice growing up where I grew up.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to a neighborhood school at first called Newsome Park Elementary, and Newsome Park now doesn't exist, but it was a wonderful school that was created for the residents who lived in Newsome Park. And Newsome Park was an area primarily made up of ex-military barracks. And the area in Newport News is heavily military. Army, Navy, Marine. As they moved out of the areas, I guess, they used the housing for other purposes. So, though it could be said in today's lexicon, in the slum, in the projects, there were projects, but some of the most accomplished Black people of the area lived there. I don't know if I mentioned to you, but the movie Hidden Figures with Taraji P. Henson playing the role of Miss Katherine Johnson. We grew up with her and her children, and she was Miss Goebel at the time. Her children were Goebel. They were in my sister's class, but I took a class with them, orchestra, music. So, they were some of the more accomplished people of our community, but we all lived and grew up together, together.
What was it like growing up in Newport News, Virginia?
It was great.
All right, there we go. So, Miss Coco, we can see you.
Oh,
all right. So hold the phone down a little bit. This is great. There we go. There we go.
I can't see you guys.
That's okay. Just stay just like that. And we're going to roll with the technology as it is right here. So, okay. So I'm not sure if you were able to hear that. I hope that
I did.
I did. Okay, good. So, I think that, what's great about this clip is that oftentimes we hear about an incredible person and we wonder how that person came to be. And I think this clip is great because it kind of demystifies some of the process of how community context really helps to shape and grow a person. And so, as you listen to that, I want you to talk a little bit about how you think about how your family, community, or upbringing contributed to the person who you are.
Wow. Oh, well, I'm not exactly sure because it always was for me. I didn't have to get to this level or get to that place. I was the youngest of 3 children, and my brother was very accomplished. In fact, he lives in the area now. And as a civil engineer after school, he was one of the lead engineers on the new bridge across Maryland to Virginia. That's here in our area. He's very accomplished, my sister as well. And I've been around a little bit myself. But it's interesting. My parents were married as teenagers. Neither graduated high school, yet all of their children graduated with honors, full scholarships to their choice. I mean, I even had a Rhodes scholarship, but I didn't know anything about no Rhodes. I wanted to go where my sister was, which was at Howard, though I later did go to Rhodesia and participated in the liberation of Rhodesia, becoming Zimbabwe. Little did I know that I would have that connection later on.
So I know that you did things like working at your family store, and I remember you talking about you and your mother having you to go and help with people in the community. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, my daddy owned the local restaurant and the corner store, and we had what people used to call the books. People got either paid or their checks on certain days at the end of the week, and sometimes their money would run out before the week ran out. So a lot of stores would allow you to get something, quote, on the books. So we would write down what you got, and at the end of the week, when you got paid, you would come in and pay what you owed. So often you could have other problems other than running out of money before you got paid. So my mom would send us to different people's houses. Go give Mrs. McFarland this, or go take something over to the Bankses or whatever. So we were very much involved in our neighborhood, both as residents, but also as helpers. And everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody's business. We even had a very unfortunate incident. The family that lived directly across the street from our corner store, the son was dating a white woman, and they got, quote, caught after a couple of years. And of course, back in those days, all a white person had to say was rape, and that was it for you. And he was electrocuted at the end of the trial. But they had been going together for years till they got caught. So it was still a period, a very dangerous period for Black people. And our community was no different, except that we didn't live our existence day by day like that. They were in a different area. They would carry on in different areas, and they got caught. What can I say? But growing up in Newport News, which has an entirely different reputation now, but it was great.
Let me ask you this. So, I always think this little factoid is so interesting about you. So, you have this connection to Katherine Johnson and of Hidden Figures. So, can you elaborate for the audience a little bit about that and how that connects to your community?
Sure. Again, as I said, our community was made up of all kinds of people, and Mrs. Johnson and her 3 daughters were an example. Her oldest daughter was first chair, and in orchestra, you played the violin. You were the first, you were the best violinist. She was first chair. And then she had twin daughters who also were in the orchestra. My sister was in the orchestra, as was I. And, we were at each other's homes. We just lived a block or so from each other. And you grew up because of segregation, because you were a doctor or a lawyer or a candlestick maker, didn't mean that you could go to the other side of town, because we all were in our segregated part of the town. So it was, again, as I say, I enjoyed growing up in Newport News.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move over to our next clip and listen to a little bit about how you got into activism at Howard University. Now, there's plenty more to share about your childhood, but I'll save that hopefully for the podcast, and folks will tune in to hear that. But for now, let's listen to this the activist turn in your life. So I'm just going to share. So let's back up a little bit, because so you were talking about going from Howard to work at the UPO, and we started to talk about the UPO because we were talking about some of the demonstrations and protests that were happening because of segregation on the roads into DC.
Yeah, Route 40. Yeah.
Route 40. Okay, right, Route 40. So when you got to Howard, did you immediately get involved in that kind of activism? How did it start?
Good question. I was thinking about it myself. I graduated. I got to Howard in the fall of '63, and the Freedom Summer was the next 6 months away. The summer of midterm, I guess you would say. And campus was already, as I phrase it, a hotbed of activity. They were collecting blankets and clothes and food to take to the blacks in Mississippi, which was apparently where that group was going. I never went. I didn't go. While most of my organizing was in D.C., I did travel with Stokely on occasion, and there was one occasion where I had my own speaking tour across Canada to about
4 or 5 universities. But my organizing was primarily in D.C., in D.C., in D.C.
Okay. So we just heard a snippet of this conversation, a snippet of a larger conversation between Sister Koko and myself, and she's sketching out a bit of her journey to joining the Black Freedom Movement. And as you noticed, Sister Koko arrived at Howard University in the fall of 1963, and this was mere weeks after the iconic March on Washington, when the sit-ins, protests, and demonstrations against racist discrimination were at their height. So, Sister Koko, if you can recall, I'll have you tell us a little bit more about what you've shared in this clip. And so specifically, my question is this: when you got to college, you could have put your effort into all kinds of fun and lighthearted activities. Why did you decide to use your energy and efforts to support NAG and Freedom Summer? Can you hear me, Miss Koko?
Oh, this is direct. I'm sorry. I was waiting for
Yes, yes. What made you decide to use your energy and I mean, you just got to college. You could just be doing all kinds of things. Why NAG and Freedom Summer?
Well, I guess it kind of was an extension of what I had been doing before coming to DC. You know, supporting the community, supporting people who didn't have as much as I had, or as much as the average family had. And it just was an extension of who I was and what I had been doing, I suppose. It felt like the right thing to do.
Okay, so in this clip, you also begin to talk a little bit about your work alongside Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, who was, of course, one of the most famous Black activists in America in that time. So if you would tell us a little bit more about your work with SNCC and Carmichael, and maybe like, how did you come to do this speaking tour, or anything about that time period, SNCC and your work in that period? How did you land there?
Interesting. I initially came to 14th Street, which at that time was where a lot of organizations around the 14th and U Street area, a lot of community organizations were, and RAP Incorporated was around the corner, and they were fairly active in the community around 16th and U, and we were on 14th Street, a couple of blocks off of U Street. And that was the SNCC office. But ironically, I was working in the new school prior to the SNCC office, which was one block up across the street. Baba Lumumba and his brother and Gaston Neal, brother Gaston Neal, were the primary organizers of the new school for Afro-American thought. And I was working, volunteering at the school before going to SNCC. The SNCC office was located someplace else at the time, and had different kind of people operating in it. So I wasn't drawn to that SNCC office. I was drawn to the new school. But when they moved from that location to 14th Street, a block up, I could see the kind of work they were doing. And so I volunteered to work there as well, to do a couple of things. But Baba Zulu, Brother Lester, who was the head of that office, offered me a job, full-time job working there, based on the things I was doing, the programs I was able to start in the community. And I guess it just fell in line with what he'd like for SNCC to be doing. We had tutorial programs. At that time, for an example, when the sisters decided to go Afro natural and wore afros, they were expelled from school. So I set up a tutorial program to help with homework, any work that they were missing, so they could turn it in. And when they were allowed to go back to school, they wouldn't be behind. I remember Sister Alberta Crow and Sister Jolene Hope, Vera Hope's sisters, as a matter of fact, were among the young sisters who were expelled that we worked with. But at any rate, Brother Baba Zulu hired me to work there. And so when the SNCC election came and Stokely became the new chairperson of SNCC, he was sent to the DC office. And once he got there, there were a couple of clerical persons there working, but he asked me if I would work with him directly. And he had a bunch of work, but I said yes. I was so pleased to do it, and it worked out well.
That's fabulous. So I think I'm going to move to I have some other things that I could ask you here, but I think I'm going to fold them into this last clip where we talk a little bit more about your interior life. And I think it shows both the interior life of you, but gives some insight in the inner life of Black activism in this period more generally. It's spotlighting how you and Miss Vera Hope Walston became friends in the shadow of the Black Power movement. And I think it really shows to your fearlessness in the face of FBI surveillance and harassment against Black activists in this period. So let's take a listen to that clip as well.
Coco to me was the most capable. I've never seen anybody fearless, just undaunting. I ain't never seen nothing like her. You know, just imagine, if you will, somebody as small as she is. Can you imagine how small she was then? She, you know, imagine her 22 years old, what she looked like, how tiny she was. And she had on a pair, one day she had on a pair of jungle fatigue and the paratroop army boots. The small, I didn't even know they made them that tiny. And she had a canteen over her shoulder. I was finished. I was through. I'm like, oh my God. And so whatever she had to do, if she had to go somewhere with Stokely, I was riding shotgun. Or if he wanted something, I ran the errands. You know, if he wanted a cheeseburger, which he usually did every day, I went to Ben's Chili Bowl and got his cheeseburger. If he wanted peach cobbler, I went and got his peach cobbler. And that's how it was. But the highlight was when he started dating Miriam and brought her to the new school. And that, oh man, you can't imagine what that did to us. Because, you know, we knew who she was. She's a big star, but he belonged to us. We coveted him. We loved him. He was so wonderful, so gorgeous and beautiful. But I can speak for myself. Coco never resented. I resented Marion Barry. I really did. I resented her. I'm like, how dare you come in here and take our golden boy like this? That's how I felt at first. When I got to know her and see how genteel and how wonderful she was, I really felt shabby, you know, because she was the epitome of genteelness, graciousness, just a wonderful woman.
Yes.
And she invited Coco to stay in her house when they got married, and Coco took her little sidekick with her, which was me, and we went to Miriam Makiba's house. On the West End in Manhattan, and when we got there, the FBI was waiting for us at the door. Remember that, Coco? We walked in?
Yes, baby.
Yeah.
But I had forgotten, so I'm glad you all on the phone.
How bad, do you know how bad we had to be to look at the FBI and tell them to go to hell?
Wow.
Do you know how bad we had to be then? I just imagine that. Coco's 22, I'm 19, and they were asking us where you going, what you doing here. We told them, mind your own business. It's none of your damn business. We doing well, something like to that effect, and told them go to hell, and went on up to Marion's place.
Okay. 22 years old telling the FBI to go to hell. That is quite something. Okay, so let me see. This is really one of my favorite clips, because just the cast of characters in this clip, we're talking about Ms. Vera, we're talking about Sister Koko, we're talking about Stokely Carmichael, we're talking about Marion Barry and the FBI, and it's just, to me, an incredible story. And so I'd like to ask you, to think about this time in your life and describe it a little bit. Like how is it that you found yourself in these circumstances, and what was it like for you?
I did not orchestrate any of it, so it's hard to even talk about. I just found myself in these circumstances. I dedicated myself to the total liberation of Africa and her people. And it happened to be at a period of time when people around me had the same motivation. And so for me, nothing could hold me back. That included at one point after this period, going to the UN and demanding to be a part of the Liberation Committee, the OAU Liberation Committee, and go to the meetings around the world. And I guess once you get determined, and once you believe in your cause, and once you believe in yourself, nothing stops you. I worked in the first year liberation government in Zimbabwe because I worked with them during their bid for liberation at the United Nations, helping them to write all the things that they had to write, their pleadings, their this, their that. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
So, I have had the opportunity to have many conversations with you. And so I know that you're doing this work, but you're also doing it in the face of all kinds of obstacles. I mean, the FBI is just one of them. And so my question to you is that, what do you think inspired this fearlessness in you?
I'm not sure. I'm sure my growing up had to do with it, because I didn't grow up in an area where I had to be afraid. People were afraid of my dad rather than the other way around. We were privileged in ways, but at the same time, we worked very hard. My dad had several businesses and his children worked in all of them. And so it wasn't like we went to the sock hop every day after school or every weekend, though we did have those times, but we worked in our community. We did. So I don't know. I don't know, but it was always there inside of me.
So everybody who has worked alongside you, who I've had the opportunity to speak with, they have these amazing stories of you, and they're always glowing in their descriptions of you. This is kind of maybe a bit of an unfair question, but do you have a sense about why you seem to inspire people in such a great way? Do you have any sense about why you think that might be?
No, not really. I want people that I relate to, people that are around me, to do the things that I do. So I try to inspire them to assist me as I do those things, or to encourage them to do it on their own.
What gives you such a strong love for the communities, both like your local community, back home in Newport News, your DC community, the larger African diaspora community? Where does this love come from?
I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It has to come from my parents, but I don't know. It's always been there.
Amazing. So we are going to come up to the question period in just a few minutes, but there's so many really interesting and cool stories that we should share that I wanted just to pick one that I just think is really just incredible. So, we were once having a casual conversation, you and I, and you happened to drop that Miriam named your daughter. So could you, share a little bit about this story? And when I say Miriam, I'm talking about Miriam Makeba for everybody in the audience. So can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Well, yes, of course. Stokely had left the SNCC office. In fact, the SNCC office had closed, and he had gone to Guinea to live. And he and Miriam were married. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, the conversation came up once, what will you name it? So if it's a boy, it'll be this. If it's a girl, it'll be this kind of a thing. And that's how it happened, just as casually as that.
See, that's still amazing to me because it's kind of just like the ethos that you were living in is remarkable to me because people say that, okay, you were the Dr. Cleveland Sadler said that you were the glue that held these things together. And so it makes sense that you would be in such a casual environment that folks that we herald in this culture are. And I remember talking to your daughter, in fact, and she's like, oh yeah, Uncle Stokely, So I just think about how incredible this is. So, okay, so we've just kind of hit we've barely scratched the surface, and I really was just actually trying to tease out a couple of quotes to sketch out a little bit of an outline about just how important you are, but also to show how many different facets of the freedom struggle you were a part of. And I'm hoping that I have whet the appetite of folks in the audience, and they will be listening to the entire podcast series, because it'll be a multi-part series where we'll talk about these things in more detail, and fill them out in a way that will give you a better understanding of both Miss Coco's life and the movement. So I hope that you will tune into that. But I think now is a good time to switch the format and open up for the audience to ask you questions, because I think it'll help us to get a sense about what are some things that they might be interested in hearing more about, and pull out some of the things that we just couldn't get to in this short period of time. So I'm going to switch to gallery view. And most folks have their cameras off. It looks like everybody has their camera off, but you don't have to turn your camera on to ask a question. But if you do have a question, just use the raised hand function, and we'll toss it up. Any questions at all? So we either have a shy audience or a quiet audience. In either case, that's okay. It'll give me the opportunity to ask the first question.
Wow, no one is curious. Okay.
Okay, so here's my question. So, Ms. Coco, we kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I think it's a good opportunity to get into more detail. When you got onto the Howard University campus and got engaged with NAG, what was it like? Like, what were some of the things that you were engaged in? What were some of the projects? So we know that Freedom Summer was going on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes, there were organizers who were organizing on campus who weren't students, as well as students. For an example, Al McShirley organized a march around the Beltway. The Beltway was a new phenomenon at that time, and it was seen as a noose around DC, Black DC. And of course, the suburbs were being established, and they were primarily white suburbs. So we marched around the Beltway to bring attention to this noose around DC and the difference between the services the housing, etc., inside and outside the Beltway. So there were things like this that attracted me to become involved, to involve myself. And as I said earlier, the collecting clothes and blankets and food to send to Mississippi and other places for Freedom Summer was just a natural. I did that at home. Go take a bag of groceries over to Miss So-and-so's house. She's not doing well and her children need to eat. So I guess it was just an extension of who I already was, what my family did. So I saw it as continuing.
That's a really good point. You know, you bring about the activism of Al McShirley and the development of the Beltway. So many times we can think about the environment of Washington, D.C. and imagine it as it's always been, as opposed to things that have developed over time, and having positive and negative effects for different groups of people. And I think the Beltway is a really great example of showing how the suburbs, the wealthier white suburbs around the city, had a very direct negative relationship in a lot of ways economically to the inner city of Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
In this time period, which is why you can get folks who are activists who are actively calling the Beltway a noose, because out of historical context that might sound strange. Why would you even think of that, right? Like, but if you think about it in the terms of white flight and the economic resources and material resources going out of the city, and then having this Beltway that are and highways that are then not only going around the city but cutting through the city, right through many Black neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods. You can see why activists of that period would argue so forcefully against it in that period. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that, again, you know, whenever I ask about something consequential in DC history, there's usually a story with Sister Koko somewhere connected to it. And Al McShirley is a whole thing unto itself. So what we didn't talk about in the clips, and I think we can take this opportunity to talk a little bit about now, is the UPO. So can you tell the audience, for folks who may not be familiar, what the UPO is?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not as versed now as I was, of course, then. I don't know if UPO is still operating or not. It is?
It is.
Great. Well, it was started in the 60s as an anti-poverty program, and they hired a lot of ex or current SNCC workers. And at the time, I was living off campus in Fairmont Heights, Maryland, just across the DC line. And UPO rented an office building over the famous Jack's Liquor Store in a part that was called Fairmont Finance. And I worked there with Chuck McDough, Dion Diamond. I don't know if Al McShirley worked in that office, but he was in and out of that office. But we organized in Fairmont Heights, Maryland. I'll never forget, at that time, one of the county council persons was a woman. Oh, her name just jumped away from me. It may come back because they named the Baltimore Washington Parkway after her, a portion of it. Anyway, she was in Fairmont Heights speaking or observing something and broke the heel on her shoe because the streets were not paved in Fairmont Heights. And when she broke the heel on her shoes, her good shoes walking through those streets, they were paved in short order. So we can thank her for giving us paved streets in Fairmont Heights. Anyway, that's where our office was, at Fairmont, in the office of Fairmont Finance on Sheriff Road, right over Jack's Liquors. So So it was good organizing with our people. In fact, as I said, growing up, I was an organizer without calling it that. So I was able to talk to the people just like I talked to the people in my own neighborhood, finding out their needs, their wants, their challenges, and translate that to the local county commissioners and elected officials.
So, it's interesting to talk about the UPO and this period of the war on poverty, because it's very different from the era of time that we're living in now, to imagine that the federal government was pumping large amounts of money into communities, giving them directly to community agencies like the UPO and other smaller ones, so that there was what they called, quote, maximum feasible participation of working and poor people themselves, engaged in efforts to raise themselves out of poverty. It's an idea that I think deserves much more research, scholarship, and attention than it actually gives, particularly the ways in which that kind of atmosphere politically allowed for the development and growth of various Black radical activists and in their organizations. I was just reading actually the other day about how anti-poverty funds were used in I can't remember the exact mechanism, but in some way to support Black Panther Party health clinics in various places. And so there's all kinds of different manifestations that the community members themselves, right, when they were empowered to do so, were able to create things that could be beneficial, like, for example, sickle cell anemia testing that I know that those health clinics did a whole lot of work towards. So UPO, under known entity, now it's kind of a shell of itself. It's probably why most people don't know about it anymore. But it was a very big deal in this period and really allowed for important community actions. So let's talk about other things. So we talked about a little bit about the UPO. We talked about SNCC. Let's talk about maybe give a little bit of insight into the new school and what it was, because I think it's one of those important institutions in Washington, D.C. that people don't know enough about.
Absolutely, it is, and what it was and is. Brother Donald Freeman, I saw him last year, had not seen him in years, is still around, riding his bike in the park. But Gaston Neal was a poet laureate, as we call him. He and Brother Don Freeman were the primary organizers of the new school. We shorten it and say the new school, but the New School for Afro-American Thought was the name of it. And it was a building that they reclaimed and physically got people to come in and paint it and clean it up and remodel it and do whatever. I volunteered to work in the bookstore, to establish a bookstore and to work in the bookstore. Myself and Sister Olumala Browdy. Sister Tu was her original name, and she changed it to Olumala. Anyway, we organized a bookstore there, and it was doing pretty good by the time I left and went across the street to the SNCC office. But it had lectures. That was where I met the infamous Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She was bigger than life for me. She was one of the people who came through the new school that helped to transform my thinking and my life. Her lectures, just her presence, actually. But we brought in everybody. We brought in, at that time, we brought in the what do you call them? The brothers who won the Olympics.
Tommy Smith and John Carlos.
That's right. Harry Edwards was their coach. So he brought him in. I went to the airport and picked him up, brought him up to the new school. They had a press conference, answered questions, and delighted the community. but that was the kind of things that they did. They, as I said, they would bring in speakers, mostly from New York, but all over the country, to speak. Noted people in the Black community. Of course, right now I'm going completely blank, but you name anybody who was anybody in the Black community in the late 60s, and they came to the new school. It was a place not just for hearing lectures, but for getting involved in projects in the community, supporting efforts to uplift the community, tutoring, after school tutoring, all kinds of positive community efforts you could be found going on at the new school.
Ms. Coco, we actually have a question in the chat, so I'm just going to pose it to you here. So Anna says, thank you for speaking with us, Sister Coco. I was wondering if you could talk about connections that you see between DC's struggle for home rule and statehood and the larger struggle for African-American political rights throughout the US.
My. Wonderful question. And I'm glad she asked it. I'm not as prepared to answer it as I would like to be, but the linkage is there. The fact that she raised the question, she's aware of it, and others should be. I was just talking to someone the other day about Facebook. The people whose messages reach me on Facebook are the same people who used to be organizers in the street, but now their topics are their grandchildren's birthday parties and things that don't lift us from where we are to where we need to go. There's an assault on the African American today, just as it was in the 60s and the 70s. And it should not be minimized. People should not think that what's going on at the border with the Haitians is an anomaly. It's not. Black people are still treated the same way since they've been coming over here, since they've been here. Now, if you happen to have a quote, good government job, you don't want to talk about it. And if you don't have a good government job and you're trying to aspire to get one, you don't talk about it. And those who talk about it are kind of over the hill like me. But African Americans are catching hell, literally catching hell right now, and nobody's talking about it.
So I think we caught a little bit of fiery Sister Coco, and I'm loving it actually. Really loving it. I think that this is a really great question. Thinking about home rule in DC in the larger struggle for political rights, because you think about this like the very basic issue of who gets to vote and who gets to have votes that are going to have elected officials with power in office, right? So that it comes to, to the question of why is it that Washington, D.C. has a non-voting congressional delegate, and how can you be, a democracy or a democratic republic without these kinds of things, having thousands and thousands of people in the nation's capital, to say nothing about Puerto Rico or Guam or these other places, right? I think where the question is really hitting on some important things. So I think along that line of asking about some more contemporary things, what's your thought, or any thoughts, if you've had any, about maybe parallels you see between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Power movement? I've heard folks say that Black Lives Matter movement is good, but it doesn't have the same political thrust as Black Power. I have some folks say that, like, well, hey, this is where the young people are, and so we need to support where it is. Any thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement as you see it? And not the organization. I want to be clear about that. Not like the specific organization. I'm talking about folks who identify with that the political ideology of Black Lives Mattering in American society.
I'm glad you added that last caveat, because there is a big difference in my opinion, in between the organization and the movement, because Black lives do matter. They've always mattered, but to whom? And how is it shown? Black people, African American people are in really, really bad shape in this country right now, and it's only getting worse. Black lives do matter. I would say that I don't see from any particular corner, from any particular place, an emphasis on understanding that Black lives matter, why Black lives matter, and how Black lives can matter more.
So, Ms. Coco, you know, this conversation we're having right now just makes me think about the soil from which the civil rights and Black power movements grew, and you know, everything I read about it is remarkable to me, because it seemed that there were young student activists who were working in collaboration with folks who were or longtime activists, et cetera, but who were really thinking structurally about how the social, political, and economic structures in the country were operating to create the everyday lived conditions. And I'm wondering, if you have any sense about how that macro level conversation kind of dropped off, because you don't really hear people in everyday language talking about power structure in the way that you would have heard in the mid 60s and into the 70s. You know, what do you think?
I really don't know, my sister. I think that you're right on how you characterized it, however, but combination of a lot of things. I think when we took our eyes off Africa, we were pushing for African liberation, African liberation, African liberation. When we took our eyes off that, I think it changed everything, because you have to have a land base, a place of power to support whatever it is. I've heard that one thing that President Obama said was his biggest regret in his presidency was losing was the assassination of Gaddafi. And that was the strongest country militarily on the continent. Now there are none. So it's a lot worse than people really realize. A lot worse.
So you're getting at something that we actually, haven't spent much of this call or this Zoom meeting talking about, which is your international politics. If you're talking about like the results of a power vacuum in Libya and the effect on the larger continent. And I know that you spent some time in the UN, and I know that you spent some time living abroad as well. And all of this was in service to the political belief that you had alongside your comrades, and with Kwame Ture, I believe at that point, I think it was Kwame Ture, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a shift into more Pan-African politics, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that. So, are there any more things that you would want to share about that, since you raised it here? Or, I don't think very people even, talk too much about Pan-African politics as an idea in mainstream conversations.
No, they don't. They don't. they'd rather talk about Junie with his pistols, and it should be talked about. I'm not trying to minimize the new spate of shooting going on in the Black community, but it's part of the symptomatic of what's going on in general. But I like to begin hearing these conversations more about, for example, they talking about how these Haitians are treated at the border. We're treated that way within the borders, you know. The cameras is on them because there's so many concentrated at one time, but we're treated that way, not at the border. And it's a conversation that needs to start up again.
Okay, so I think we're getting to the last minutes of our program here. So I wanted to just ask out to the audience one last time if they have any particular questions that they would want to ask. And if you do, you can drop them in the chat if you'd like. If not, I want to make another plug for the Self-Determined podcast, because not only in this podcast are we going to get at a more narrative arc in terms of Sister Koko's story, but we'll also be doing that with other folks, and I think it gives you a look at African-American history generally, but civil rights, Black power history more specifically, Pan-African history more specifically. And I think the storytelling will help you to understand it in a real way, as opposed to a more when you hear the story from the biographical perspective, I think you can understand it in a different way. And I can see now that a link to the podcast has just been dropped in the chat, so you can check for it there, but you can also find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. It will be there, and there will be continuing conversations there, ideas for you to explore, to debate with, critique, just engage with. So I hope that you will. So I know that also Humanities DC has a whole line of programs that they will be continuing to do. So I want you to check your emails for the listserv to see what they have going on. I think the thing I just recently heard was about Go-Go in DC, like Afro-diasporic connections to Go-Go in DC. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it sounded really interesting to me. So great things are happening. Do go to their website and check that out. Check out the Self-Determined podcast. Am I forgetting anything, Ms. Coco? I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I was supposed to plug. Anything you want to plug?
No, you're doing great.
Okay, all right. Well, if there's nothing further, here we go. Check out Humanities DC's programs on their website, humanities.dc.
That's right.
.org. I want to thank everybody here today. I want to thank Humanities DC. I want to thank the tech people today, because we had a little bumpy ride with our tech, but we were able to pull it together at the end. I want to thank everybody who was listening today. And I definitely want to thank you, Sister Koko. I know that this forum is not normally your thing, so I appreciate you coming and hanging in with us anyway. That's all I have for now. I hope that we will be able to catch you, if not in the streets of DC, when this COVID thing has died down or gone away forever and ever and ever.
Never.
If not, then on the internet somewhere. So thank you all for your time, and we'll leave it at that.
Bye-bye.